The faint hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that accompanied me as I drifted through the dimly lit corridors of the abandoned research station. I had always heard that space could be cruel and unforgiving, but this place made those warnings feel like child's play. Soreth, once a thriving hub of intergalactic research, was now nothing more than a desolate tomb. The walls were scarred, their once pristine surfaces now covered in layers of grime and decay. The air was thick, stifling, as if the station itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. I walked cautiously, the crunch of my boots against the dust echoing in the stillness. I had come here with a team of scientists, all eager to unravel the mysteries hidden within the station's crumbling halls. But something had gone terribly wrong. The virus we had uncovered, initially thought to be a harmless pathogen, turned out to be far more dangerous than we could have imagined. It spread faster than we could quarantine it, infecting my colleagues with terrifying efficiency. One by one, they fell sickened, weakened, and then silenced by the insidious disease. The station's automated systems failed, its defenses useless against an enemy no one had been prepared for. By the time I realized I was alone, it was too late to do anything. There was no escaping Zorath, no rescue coming. I was the last survivor stranded on this forsaken planet, left to die in isolation with nothing but the remnants of my team's research to keep me company. But as I wandered deeper into the station, I stumbled upon something, or rather, someone that changed everything. She was lying on a metal table, her body hooked up to a series of strange alien devices. At first, I thought she was just another experiment, another casualty of whatever twisted research had been conducted here. But as I drew closer, I realized she was alive. Barely. Her skin shimmered in the dim light, a silver sheen that seemed to ripple as though it were not quite real. Her eyes, when they flickered open for a brief, agonized moment, were an unsettling shade of molten silver, not quite human, but not entirely alien either. There was a strange familiarity in her gaze, as if she were trying to understand me even as her body betrayed her. She was weak, her breathing shallow, every movement seemingly an effort. But there was something else there, something deep within those eyes that stirred a feeling I couldn't quite place. I knelt beside her, my breath catching in my throat. The room was eerily silent, the faint beeping of her vital signs the only indication that she was still alive. I had no medical training, hell, I was just a researcher, a human with no real experience in alien biology. But I couldn't leave her like this. I had to do something. That's when I remembered the stories, the rumors that had circulated among the humans in the galaxy. There had always been whispers of humans possessing something unique, something that made us different from other species. Our blood. It was said to have healing properties, a life force that could mend wounds, cure diseases, even save those on the brink of death. It sounded too far-fetched to be true, the kind of thing you'd hear in a tavern or read in a badly written pulp novel. But standing in this cold, desolate station with a dying alien in front of me, I couldn't afford to dismiss it. Without hesitation, I pulled a small medical kit from my belt and drew a needle from the sterile pack. I'd never done anything like this before, never thought I would, but in that moment, there was no other choice. I pressed the needle to my arm, and as the blood filled the vial, I prayed it would work. I had no idea if it would. But as I looked at the alien before me, her body trembling in the dim light, I realized something: if I didn't try, she would die. And so would I, eventually, alone. This was my only shot. I let the blood drip from the vial, watching as it made contact with her skin. There was a moment of silence, an odd stillness in the air, and then nothing. No explosion of light, no immediate change. I waited, unsure of what to expect. But slowly I began to see her skin, once pale and lifeless, started to glow faintly, as though my blood was stirring something inside her. She gasped, her breathing deepening as the color returned to her face. She wasn't dying anymore, she was healing. And then the faintest of smiles crossed her lips, a sign that she wasn't just recovering, she was waking up. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I had saved her. Somehow, against all odds, I had saved her. And yet, even as I watched her stir, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something far beyond what I had bargained for. My blood had done more than heal her. It had awakened something in her. Something I couldn't yet understand. I watched as she stirred, her body still frail, yet undeniably alive. The faint glow that had enveloped her skin was fading, but the signs of life were unmistakable, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her eyes fluttering beneath the weight of exhaustion. I felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I had saved her, a complete stranger, an alien being whose species was as foreign to me as the stars in the sky. But as I stood there, watching her slowly regain consciousness, I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. There was something off about all of this. Something I couldn't explain. Her eyes finally opened fully, and I was struck by the intensity of her gaze. The silver of her irises shimmered as if they were absorbing the light around them, reflecting an intelligence and emotion that I couldn't place. She blinked once, twice, as though trying to adjust to the world around her. When her gaze locked with mine, I felt an odd connection, an unspoken bond that seemed to transcend language, species, even reason. "Who are you?" Her voice was soft, fragile like the whisper of wind through a desolate forest. But there was power in it too, an undertone of something ancient, something that had seen the vastness of the universe. It wasn't the question I had expected. I was prepared to explain that I was human, a survivor of this nightmare, but I realized the question wasn't just about me. She was asking about us, the encounter, the blood. What had just happened? I'm a human," I stammered, still caught off guard. "My name is Riley." I hesitated, unsure how to explain what had just transpired. How could I possibly explain the depth of what had happened? I wasn't even sure I understood it myself. Her gaze shifted to the medical monitors beside her, the flickering lights that had once been a sign of impending disaster now comforting in their consistency. Her attention returned to me, her face more alert, more present than it had been before. "Your blood," she said, her voice still shaky but gaining strength. "It saved me. But it's doing something else." I swallowed hard, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean? What else?" She looked down at herself, her hands trembling slightly as she placed them on her abdomen. "It's changing me." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I could sense the confusion, even fear, in her words. But there was something else too, something fascinating. It wasn't just fear. It was awe, like she was witnessing a miracle. I stepped closer, trying to process her words, but they didn't make sense. How could my blood, human blood, be doing this to her? We were so different. Our biology wasn't compatible. That's what science had always taught us. But here she was, a living being from another world, who had somehow been transformed by my blood. I could barely hold my questions in. "What are you?" The words escaped me before I could stop them, and I regretted them immediately. It was an ignorant question, born of fear and curiosity. Her expression softened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something like sympathy in her eyes. She didn't seem offended, just weary. "I am Zira," she said. Her voice carried the weight of centuries, a name that meant nothing to me but seemed to mean everything to her. "I am Syrian." Syrian. The word sounded foreign, but the way she said it felt significant, something ancient, something powerful. Her race, her people, had likely been among the most advanced beings in the galaxy. They were rumored to have mastered technology far beyond what we humans could even comprehend. Yet, here she was healed by my blood and in a state of utter confusion. I took a step back, trying to understand what was happening. "What is happening to you? What's my blood doing to you?" The questions spilled out in a rush, one after the other. I couldn't stop myself. It was all too much, too overwhelming. She closed her eyes briefly, as if to gather her thoughts. "Your blood is not just healing me. It's integrating with me, adapting. It's giving me something. A gift. A curse." I didn't know what to say to that. "A curse," my voice was barely a whisper. Zira opened her eyes, and I saw something in them that I hadn't noticed before, something shifting, a new light sparking behind those strange silver irises. A gift, she repeated, because it saved my life. A curse, because I do not know what will become of me now. You have given me something I cannot control. Her words haunted me. I had never imagined that a simple act sharing my blood could have consequences this profound. The thought of giving her life, only to inadvertently transform her into something else, something beyond her control, was terrifying. Before I could respond, Zirai's hand fluttered to her abdomen again, her fingers tracing the outline of something I hadn't noticed before, a subtle, yet growing curvature. Her body was changing, reshaping in ways that shouldn't have been possible. My blood had done this, and now I feared it was doing more than just saving her. It was creating something. A chill ran down my spine as I stood there, watching her, unsure whether I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. This was no longer just about survival. This was something much bigger, something I wasn't prepared for. But it was already too late. Her eyes met mine again. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and growing unease. Zira, the alien whose life I had saved, had started to recover at an alarming rate. What had begun as a slow process, where her body seemed to reject the virus, quickly turned into something else entirely. Her skin had regained its sheen, glowing with a faint silver-blue hue, and her eyes were now sharper, more alert, as though they could see far beyond what any human could comprehend. Yet, despite all of this, there was something deeper, something more unsettling unfolding within her. Her abdomen, once flat, began to swell with a subtle, undeniable curve. It wasn't just a bloated stomach. This was something different. The shape of it, the way it seemed to shift and expand, made it clear she was pregnant. The reality of it hit me like a freight train, and I couldn't help but feel my stomach twist with a mixture of awe and terror. How could this be happening? How could my blood, which was meant to heal, cause this? Zira seemed aware of the change, but she didn't speak of it right away. Her silence was unsettling. The only sounds in the room were the quiet beeps of the medical monitors and the occasional rustle of her movements. Her body was growing stronger by the hour, but it wasn't just her physical state that was evolving. There was something different about her. I could feel it. I'd never met anyone or anything like her. She wasn't just healed. She was becoming something else. I wasn't sure whether that was a blessing or a curse. It was in the early hours of the third day that I finally gathered the courage to speak to her about it. Zira, I started, my voice shaky, unsure of how to approach the topic. What's happening to you? Your body. It's changing. In your stomach. She met my gaze then, her silver eyes not full of fear, but something far deeper. Understanding, perhaps. She placed a hand over her abdomen, almost instinctively, as though she were trying to protect whatever it was that had taken root inside her. I told you, she said softly, her voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard before. Your blood. It is not just healing me. It is creating something new. Something I do not fully understand. I felt my heart race as I processed her words. But this is impossible. I mean, how can this be happening? I'm human. You're not even from this planet. She nodded slowly, her expression grave. I know. It is not natural, not by the laws of my people, and perhaps not even by the laws of your own. But it is happening. I can feel it, growing inside me, and it is not just your blood that is changing me. She paused, her gaze shifting, as though she were sensing something just beyond her reach. It is the child. The word hit me like a hammer. Child. My blood hadn't just saved her life, it had somehow merged with her, fused in a way I couldn't begin to comprehend, and now there was life growing inside of her. A hybrid life. It's a mixture of two vastly different species. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, as though the very gravity of the situation was pulling me into an unknown void. Zira seemed to sense my distress. I know this is overwhelming, she said, her tone steady. I do not know what it means, but I cannot ignore it. My body is not just healing. It is adapting to your blood in ways I cannot control. I had no answers for her. I couldn't even begin to understand what was happening. But the more I watched her, the more I realized that her transformation was something beyond just biology. It was something profound. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about connection. We had crossed some threshold, some boundary, and neither of us could go back. The monitors in the room beeped softly, drawing my attention. I glanced at the readouts, surprised to see that her vitals had stabilized completely. In fact, they were improving. Her heart rate was steady, and her body temperature was now normal, almost human. She was no longer the alien, fragile being I had first found. She was changing into something else entirely. I stepped closer, unsure of what to say next. So what happens now? What should we do? Zira gave a small sigh, her silver eyes softening as she looked at me. I do not know what will come of this. I do not know what I will become. She looked down at her abdomen once more, her fingers tracing the curve of her belly. But I know that what is growing inside me is part of both of us, and I fear the consequences. For both of us. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. We were no longer just two beings from different species. We had created something powerful, something that could change everything. But with that power came an overwhelming uncertainty. We had no idea what would happen to her, to the child, or to us. We were venturing into unknown territory, and there was no map to guide us. For a long time, we didn't speak. I watched her, and she watched me, both of us lost in the enormity of what had just begun. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though we were both waiting for something, waiting for the next step to reveal itself, even if we didn't know what that step would be. I wasn't sure how long we stood there, the weight of it all settling over us, but I knew one thing: things would never be the same again. Whatever happened next, whatever came from the strange bond between us, it would shape the future in ways neither of us could predict. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I was no longer just a survivor. I was part of something much larger, something that would echo through the universe. As the days passed, the tension between us grew. Zira's transformation continued, her body changing in ways that defied logic, and with each shift I felt more and more like a spectator to something far beyond my comprehension. There were moments when I could almost see the alien aspects of her nature fading away, replaced by something new, something human. It wasn't just the way she moved or the way her skin seemed to glimmer in the light. It was the way her eyes had softened, the subtle shifts in her voice, the faintest hint of vulnerability that had started to seep through her once impervious demeanor. But then, just as suddenly, there were moments when she would withdraw completely, her gaze turning distant, as though she were retreating into herself, trying to make sense of the incredible changes happening within her. I couldn't blame her. I was feeling the same way. We were both trapped in a cycle of uncertainty, our lives intertwined in a way that neither of us had asked for, and certainly never expected. It was on the 7th day after I had first given her my blood that Zira finally opened up. She had been pacing the small room where I had been keeping her, her movements fluid and graceful despite the visible weight that had begun to swell within her. She was no longer just the alien I had found in the medical bay. She was something different, something in between. "Riley," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can feel it. It's growing stronger every day." I glanced up from the small data pad I had been scanning, my heart sinking as I met her gaze. Her eyes were filled with a mix of wonder and apprehension, the silver depths of them reflecting a truth I wasn't ready to face. Feel what I asked, though I already knew the answer. I didn't want to hear it, but I had no choice. The child, she placed a hand gently over her abdomen, where the bulge had become undeniable. It wasn't large, but the way her body had adjusted to it made it clear that whatever was inside her was alive, growing, changing. Zira took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "It's not just any child, Riley. It's a fusion. My species, your blood, something new." The word hung in the air like a heavy shadow. New, as though everything that had come before didn't matter anymore, as though what was growing inside her was an entirely new being, something no one had ever seen before. I swallowed, the lump in my throat almost too much to bear. Do you know what it means? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What's happening to you? To this thing inside you? She didn't respond immediately, her gaze shifting downwards as she seemed to search for the right words. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken fears. Finally, she looked back up at me, her eyes filled with an intensity I hadn't seen before. I don't know, she admitted, but I feel it. The power. It's like my body is no longer just my own. It's as if the blood you gave me is merging with mine in a way that I can't control. And I can feel it, Riley, the child. It is more than just part of me. It is changing me. The way she said it made me feel cold. Her words weren't just unsettling, they were dangerous. I had never thought of my blood as something capable of such drastic changes. I was just a human. What did I know about alien biology? How could I have known that by saving her? I was triggering something far beyond anything I could handle. I had never signed up for this. I had never imagined that a single act of compassion would spiral into something so unnatural. Z-Ra seemed to sense the turmoil inside me. She stepped closer, her presence both comforting and overwhelming. Her hand found mine, a gesture that felt strangely familiar despite everything we had been through. She wasn't asking for my forgiveness, nor did she need it. She was simply acknowledging the reality we were both facing. Riley, I am not asking you to understand, she said, her voice low and steady. I am not asking you to accept what's happening, but I need you to know that this is not just my fate. It is ours. You and I are connected now, in a way that cannot be undone. The child inside me. It will shape the future. Our future. I tried to swallow the panic rising in my chest. The child. Her words were still ringing in my mind. What kind of future was she talking about? And more importantly, what kind of future could we have? Do you think this is a good thing? I asked, my voice trembling. I mean, what's going to happen to you, to the child, to both of us? She didn't hesitate. I don't know, she said again, this time more firmly, but I have no choice but to face it. I am not afraid, Riley. I am uncertain, but I am not afraid. Her words were a strange comfort, even though I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense that things were slipping out of control. She had accepted her fate with a calmness I didn't understand. Maybe that was the difference between us. Z-Ra had lived through things I couldn't even imagine, and I was still clinging to the remnants of my humanity, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what we had become. The silence between us stretched, both of us lost in our thoughts. I wanted to believe everything would turn out okay. I wanted to think that this was just some bizarre turn of events that we'd get through. But deep down, I knew that there was no going back. Whatever had begun between us, whatever had been forged in the blood I had given her, was more than just a connection. It was a bond that would change everything. We were in this together now, and there was no telling what the next step would be. The days bled into each other, indistinguishable, as the tension between Z-Ra and me grew heavier. We no longer spoke in the same casual tones we once had. There was a distance between us now, not because we didn't care, but because neither of us fully understood what was happening. I watched her, studied her every movement, trying to grasp the changes, both physical and emotional, that were taking place inside her. Each day, her body grew more alien, more foreign, yet there was something undeniably human about her now. Her mannerisms had softened, her voice no longer so stern. But there was also an underlying power, a quiet strength emanating from her that I couldn't ignore. It was clear that the child was no longer just a part of her. It was its own entity, pulsating, alive, shifting within her as though it had a will of its own. I had never seen anything like it. The swelling of her abdomen wasn't just the sign of pregnancy, it was the manifestation of something far more complex. The child wasn't growing in the conventional sense, it was transforming her, and it was terrifying. The first night I noticed something truly out of the ordinary was when I woke to find her standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. The moonlight bathed her form, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Her silhouette was sharp, almost ethereal, the curves of her body more pronounced, the lines of her face sharper, more angular. The air around her seemed to hum with an energy I couldn't place, something strange, otherworldly. Zira, I called out, my voice low but uncertain. She didn't respond right away, and for a moment I was afraid she hadn't heard me. Then she turned, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the dark. There was a glint of something wild in them, something primal. "I can feel it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not just the child anymore. It's me. I can feel myself changing, Riley. I am becoming something new." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but I didn't know how. I was as lost as she was, and the look in her eyes told me that she was equally frightened by what was happening. "I don't understand," I finally said, stepping closer. "What do you mean? What's happening to you?" Her eyes were distant for a moment, as if she were seeing something far beyond the walls of the room. "The blood you gave me. It wasn't just healing me. It connected with me. It's creating something that is neither Syrian nor human. It's different. I am different." I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the child. It was her too. She was changing in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. This wasn't just some medical anomaly. This was something more, something beyond biology. "We need to figure out what's happening," I said, my voice shaky with the weight of everything we were facing. "We can't just sit here and hope it all works out." Zira nodded, though her expression didn't change. She seemed distant, detached, as though she were already resigned to the idea that whatever came next, she would have to face it alone. It pained me to see her like this. She wasn't the alien I had first encountered, nor was she the person I'd thought I'd come to know over the past few days. She was something in between, something on the edge of transformation, neither here nor there. The next few days were filled with tests. I had scrounged together every piece of medical equipment I could find, anything that might give us a clue as to what was happening inside her. I had no formal medical training, but I did what I could. Blood samples, scans, even makeshift experiments, all of them returned inconclusive results. There was nothing human or alien about her blood anymore. It was something entirely new, a strange blend of the two species, with properties that were both familiar and utterly foreign. As I watched her, I realized how much we had both changed. She was no longer the strong, impenetrable figure that had first emerged from the wreckage. She was softer now, vulnerable in a way that I hadn't expected. She was struggling with this transformation as much as I was, if not more. But there was no way to stop it. Whatever had begun when I gave her my blood had set into motion a chain of events that neither of us could control. One night, as we sat in silence, Zira spoke again, her voice barely a murmur. "I am not just Syrian anymore, Riley. I am something else, and I fear I may not be able to control it for much longer." The gravity of her words hit me harder than anything else. She wasn't just talking about the child anymore, she was talking about herself. Whatever had happened to her was slowly unhinging the very core of her being. She was becoming something other, something that didn't belong to either of our worlds. I sat there, staring at her, trying to grasp onto some thread of hope. But deep down I knew she was right. This was out of our hands now. We were no longer just two survivors in a chaotic world. We were becoming part of something far greater, something that would either destroy us or reshape everything we knew. The weeks passed in a blur, each one bleeding into the next, as Zira's condition grew more difficult to track. The changes were subtle. At first, her skin took on a luminous quality, her eyes flickering with an intensity that seemed to pierce through me whenever she looked my way. But over time, the shifts became more pronounced. Her body was no longer just adapting to the blood I had given her. It was morphing into something unrecognizable, a hybrid of two species that defied all logic and reason. The child inside her had grown, yes, but so had she. She wasn't just pregnant anymore. She was becoming something else, something I couldn't name, something that scared both of us. I tried to comfort her when I could, but it was becoming harder to find the right words. Zira had always been strong, indomitable even. But now, she seemed to be losing that strength, or perhaps it was transforming into something darker, more primal. She would spend hours sitting alone in the dimly lit room, her eyes unfocused, lost in thoughts she refused to share with me. The silence between us had grown, a gulf between two people who were no longer sure they belonged in the same world. One evening, I found her standing in front of the mirror, her hand pressed to the curve of her abdomen. The reflection was haunting, not because of what she looked like, but because of what she had become. She looked like a completely different person, her features sharp and angular, her body pulsing with an energy I couldn't understand. It wasn't just the alien blood within her anymore. It was something more, something ancient, something alive in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Zira, I said quietly, stepping into the room. My voice seemed to break the spell, and she turned to face me, her silver eyes gleaming in the low light. "I can't control it anymore, Riley," she said, her voice trembling. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her facade, the vulnerability that she had so carefully hidden away. The power inside me, it's growing faster than I can keep up with. I feel like I'm losing myself, and I'm afraid of what I might become. I stepped closer, unsure of how to offer her the comfort she so desperately needed. I didn't have the answers. Hell, I didn't even know what was happening to her. But I did know one thing: I couldn't let her go through this alone. "You're not losing yourself," I said softly, my hand reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. "You're evolving, but you're still Zira. You're still here. And I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out together." She didn't respond at first, but her gaze softened. For a brief moment, it was as though she allowed herself to believe my words, to believe that there was still hope. But that hope was fleeting. The air between us was thick with the unspoken truth: we had no control over what was happening. We were both at the mercy of forces far beyond our understanding. "I don't know if I can keep carrying this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not just the child anymore. It's like something inside me is taking over. I don't know how long I can hold on to who I am before it's all lost." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was fighting something that was both external and internal, something she couldn't escape. It wasn't just about the pregnancy anymore. It was about her very identity. She was caught in a battle between the person she had been and whatever she was becoming, and there was nothing either of us could do to stop it. "Zira, listen to me," I said, my voice firm, though I could feel the tremor in my own chest. "You're not losing yourself. You're changing, but you're still you. We'll figure this out. We have to." She met my gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "You think we can? You think we can stop this before it consumes me?" I didn't have an answer. I wished I did. But the truth was, neither of us knew what would happen next. All I knew was that Zira wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for something bigger: the future, her future, and the future of the child inside her. I could feel that much, at least. Whatever had happened when I gave her my blood had created a bond between us, something neither of us had fully understood, but something that tied us together in ways that went far beyond what I had ever imagined. And in that moment, I realized that I was just as much a part of this transformation as she was. It wasn't just her body that was changing. It was both of us. We had crossed a line together, and now we were both dealing with the consequences of it. Zira took a slow breath, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to brace herself for whatever was to come. She seemed stronger now, or at least more resolved. "I don't know what the future holds, Riley, but I do know one thing: we have no choice but to move forward. Whatever happens next, we face it together." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at the pit of my stomach. We were walking into unknown territory, and there was no telling what lay ahead. But as she spoke those words, something inside me clicked. She was right. We had no choice but to move forward. Whatever was happening, we were in this together, and that had to be enough. The future was uncertain, yes, but we still had each other. The next few days felt like an eternity. Zira's transformation continued to accelerate, and with each passing hour, The changes in her became more pronounced. Her once sleek, silver skin now shimmered with an almost iridescent quality. Her eyes glowed faintly even in the dark, and her senses seemed heightened to an unnerving degree. She could hear the smallest noises, smell things from miles away, and even sense the subtlest shifts in the atmosphere. It was as if the blood I had given her was rewriting her very DNA, merging her biology with something beyond the boundaries of her species or mine. I tried to stay by her side, watching over her as best as I could, but the strain of it was wearing on me. There were moments when I felt powerless, unsure of what to do or how to help her, as she struggled with the internal battle that raged within her. The child, now fully formed, was a constant presence, its movements quick and erratic, as though it were aware of everything around it. But it wasn't just the child that was changing her. It was the energy inside her, something raw and untamed, like an ancient force that refused to be controlled. On the 7th day after I gave her my blood, we reached a breaking point. It happened late at night, when the stars were the only things visible beyond the small, dim-lit room. Z-Ra had been pacing restlessly for hours, her breath shallow and uneven. I could see the tension in her, the way her muscles tightened, the way her body was fighting against itself. She was no longer able to conceal the pain. It was becoming too much for her to bear. Z-Ra, I said, stepping toward her. She had paused near the window, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. You need to rest. You're pushing yourself too hard. But she didn't respond. Her body trembled as if under an invisible weight, and her fists clenched at her sides. I knew better than to try and force her into a bed, or to tell her to calm down. This was beyond what either of us had expected. She was more than just human or alien now. She was something entirely new, and I had no idea how to help her manage the force inside her. I can feel it, she muttered, her voice breaking. It's too much, Riley. The power inside me, it's taking over. I can't hold it back anymore. I stepped forward cautiously, not sure whether to touch her, not sure what would happen if I did. But I couldn't stand watching her like this. She was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to save her from herself. Z-Ra, listen to me, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. But you have to let me in. Don't shut me out. Please. Her gaze flickered toward me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of recognition in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. Something human, something that reminded me of the Z-Ra I had met before all this madness began. I am losing control, she whispered, her hands shaking. I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting it. I reached out, my fingers brushing against her arm. It was warm, almost burning under my touch. But I didn't pull away. I had to be strong for both of us, even if I had no idea what we were facing. You will keep fighting, I said, my voice firm. You've survived this long. You're stronger than you think, Z-Ra. You've survived everything the universe has thrown at you. You can survive this too. She closed her eyes at my words, and for a moment, I thought she might crumble into me, letting the weight of everything pull her down. But instead, she took a deep breath, and when she opened her eyes again, there was a fire in them. A determination I hadn't seen before. I won't let it consume me, she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. I will control this. I will control us. The shift in her was palpable. I could feel it in the air, a crackling energy that seemed to radiate off of her. It was as though she had tapped into something deep within, something raw and powerful. I could see the veins of her skin glowing faintly, the air around us heavy with an almost electric charge. This was no longer just a battle of willpower. This was a fight for survival, and I could feel the intensity of it. As Z-Ra stood there, her body trembling but resolute, I realized something that I hadn't fully understood before. Whatever was happening to her, whatever this child was, it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about both of us. Our fates were entwined in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. We had crossed a line together, and now we were bound by something that neither of us could escape. There was no going back. Whatever happens next, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We're in this together. You and me. Always. Zira nodded, her lips curling into a faint yet fierce smile. Always, she echoed. And in that moment, as the energy between us intensified, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it. Together.